the sound to its source. Hey, Opposing Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about lead sounds, the art of lead sounds. There's more. It can be simple sound design or complicated sound design. This is the sound I have drummed up for you. There's a couple of variations on the sound I want to show you, but a good lead sound should be able to have a pretty good vibrato and should have an excellent vibrato and an excellent pitch bend capabilities. Typical things with lead sound, so you can be expressive with it. So something like this. So you see we have a wide range of capabilities as far as expressivity goes. Now let's look at the actual range. So let's go down a couple octaves. So I'm using my mod wheel, my pitch bend wheel quite a bit. I really love playing these types of sounds. Like I was playing it way too much before I started this video. I almost couldn't start the video. So we have some timbral options as well. So first one up, I'm going to introduce some clipping. I'm using the voicing tab quite obviously and the glide setting in the oscillator tab. We'll take a look at those. Also, I have these macros set up. So one is controlling my position from a saw wave to a square wave. The square wave sounds, people refer to square waves as hollow. I don't know. I never really quite made sense of the word, but I know when they say hollow, they're usually referring to the texture of a square or the timbre of a square wave. I mean, I doubt they're referring to the harmonic spectrum because, like, yeah, it's missing the even harmonic, so it's hollow. But I don't think that's what people were thinking when they said it. Okay, and that's with the clipping on. We also have the ability, as you can see here, 3, I'm controlling the amount of RM. So if I take this away, we get one of those driving leads. Maybe a little too low. So leads, they're good for layers. So layered leads are like another topic, but basically a lead should be just that. It should be able to pull your song in the direction you want to go using melody. The sound design, you want to be expressive. So you want to have moments where you can have some cool vibrato, and a lot of leads are very, very simple. Most songs, the basics, saw wave, square wave, sine wave, triangle wave, I don't know what the finger thing was about, but those are like the leads of leads. Like the saw wave is the lead. Just distort a saw wave and add some vibrato capabilities and you're well on your way. Now it's all up to you as a creative person to create a cool background for your lead, all these types of things. There are other leads that are much more interesting that involve turning on and off. Like we could turn on and off our distortion here. If I were to hook up something here and have it sort of morph into new sounds, that would sort of require the construction of a track. So what we're going to look at is just general lead principles. So here, let's go back to our first example. Let's turn off the distortion. So I turned off the modulating oscillator essentially. So the first thing I'm going to do when I want to make lead is I'm going to have my wavetable, and I'm going to choose a wavetable. Now, I didn't even mess with the others, but you can do this with any wave form. I stuck to the saw square because those are just classic waveforms. Then I went to the voicing tab, and I turned on the unison. Without the unison on, very, very retro. I love these sounds. I think they're excellent. They're really simple, but they're so good. But some of you guys may want more of that. It's more of the style these days to have like 1 or 2 on the unison. I chose 3. This is actually more intensive than 4 or 2, I believe, because it's an odd number. I don't know. I was reading places. I could see that happening in an equation. But anyways, I liked it. Here's the sound of 2. And I also have my pitch cutoff on. So if I turn that off, it provides very different timbres, and these are big deals with leads. They make a large impact on the way you would interact with the sound. And so, yes, So what I did was I settled on 3 and I took the unison pitch cutoff. So I'm basically chorusing the sound. So that's how you get those sort of wide, spread out sounds, and it works really nice with the saw wave. Some waveforms, it will not sound so great, but in this one, it sounds fine. I hooked up macro 2 to allow me to switch between the square and the saw. If I were to really quick MIDI learn this. Okay, cool. So you have your options when you set that sort of a thing up. Now you could get into additional layers, but along the line of layer leads, if your entire song is going to be just the one lead, then you might consider that, but you may consider leaving it as a thin sounding lead to fill up the track with other elements like the drums, and that may offer a little more creativity in that direction if you want to go that way. The drums, background chords, supporting elements, those could really begin to take the forefront while the melody drives it, but they could take up more of the space instead of filling it completely up with melody. So that's something else I've noticed with a lot of newer tracks is the tendency to have simpler melodies so that the backgrounds can be more interesting, or just the verb can ring out clearer. So a lot of times you leave it thinner and not put anything there and just have a lot of reverb. That'll sound really good as well. And that's something I also have on right now. I have some reverb. You see, I brought up the color. So the color basically affects it's basically EQing the reverb. So if you have it down here, it's going to be a darker timbre. If you have it up, it'll be a brighter timbre. So I think it's just a high pass or whatever, because they have a color knob here and it's like a similar deal. And then the size, so it's a longer verb, and I took it down because with it all the way up, the reverb was like the same volume as my direct signal, which was very counterintuitive for a lead. So I took it down and fixed it. So that's what's going on there. I do have a high pass on, and this idea is a simple idea, but to give a little more click and pop to my lead, what I like to do sometimes is, in this case, actually, I did it a little bit backwards. So what you could do is, let's say that you have a lead and you want it to be really like bow, bow, like a really hard lead. Grab a filter, turn up the resonance, and then have a very short envelope movement, just a little envelope movement like that. And turn up our resonance. You see that tone being introduced, and then you just make it much shorter and you control the range. And it will add a little pop at the beginning. That's an undesirable, so you want it to be relatively short. That's so fun. And so that's one way to get a little more attack out. We got rid of it. It's also a way, when I turn it on, you might be going, but it went away a little bit. But that's because I'm reeling back parts of it. I'm high passing some of it because I don't want that much sound. If I were to put this in a track, I'd want some room for some other stuff. And that's something else that you should be aware of is when you're working on it, you might be making the biggest lead sound on the planet, but will it jive with everything else? It's better to take care of things like what areas of the spectrum are you going to be working in earlier on in the creative process so you can make decisions that are more geared towards what you actually want. If you wait to filter out parts of the lead when you're mixing, you might be sacrificing tone that you were creatively going for. And so that can be heart-wrenching, trying to balance the two. You're like, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this if I want my kick to get through, stuff like that. So in this case, this wouldn't really be much of a problem with the kick, but just making room, making creative decisions early on, just shaping my spectrum so that it'll work and jive later on down the line. Another thing that I did here to but make the sound more interesting is, besides the voicing, I went into the oscillator tab, I changed the glide to rate, and I adjusted the time. So your glide setting, you'll know what you want to do, and it's also covered in the massive from the ground up. So I'm not going to spend much more breath on this, but this is like a fundamental part. Do you want a poly lead? And sometimes you might be saying, how do those people get those really cool glide poly leads? Well, this is what I do. I'm not sure what they do, but you just clone massive. So you have two massives, and then you write out separate lines. So it can be tedious and time consuming, but the results are so cool. So that's just the way you do that. There's no like magic polyphonic glide. Like there are sort of weird ways of thinking about it, but it's never going to be exactly what you want. It's better to just clone it and write out two separate lines. So if you play everything in live, it means you got to be a good player. So let's come over here to Modulation Oscillator. You got to be a good player either way, but if you're going to like create a harmony for a part, that means you have to be a consistent player. So Modulation Oscillator. So here I was like, all right, cool. I've got some cool sounds coming out of my thing. If you're wondering where the vibrato came from, you should have it by default, but this is the setup for the vibrato. If you go to just new sound, it'll just automatically be there. So we have Modulation Oscillator. So for this thing, I've got my sounds. And I was like, cool, this is really great, but I want some more control. So I went in and activated this guy, and I went to one of my ratios that we talked about in previous videos, and I said, oh, 7 sounds pretty cool, and I'm going to ring modulate it. So ring modulation has the tendency, because of the way it creates sidebands, which is also covered in the From the Ground Up series, it will add a sort of grit sound to it, especially if you're running through distortion, because then that'll sort of smush, that'll push the sidebands down and into each other, or sort of even them out a bit into your sound, and it melds really well with large spectrum, highly predictable sounds. That was a mess. If you have like a saw wave, it's a very structured sound, right? And even if we phased it with 3 other saw waves, like what we're doing in the voicing tab, that's still a very predictable thing. Like you can hear the spectrum and the various phasing going on inside it. So if we were to add some harmonics and parts of the spectrum and then distort it, it'll smooth it out over the spectrum and sound really nice. Another thing is they're not stagnant harmonics, because ring modulation will do it for every harmonic in the series. So we'll get a whole bunch of like, it'll basically like widen out our signal frequency wise. It's not a really good word because that makes it sound spatially wise, but frequency wise, the signals, there'll be more going on, obviously, but it's useful to sort of have that visual of like one frequency becomes like splits into 2. And I'm not even doing it all the way. So there's still the middle one. So there's 3 new frequencies for every frequency that was already there. So if I turn, so what I've done here is I'm using 3 to turn this guy all the way off. And so I just turn it off, bam. And now my ring modulation is active, and that's what it sounds like. Do I have this one linked up to anything? I do not. I will link it to something. MIDI learn. There we go. So that's the straight tone, and this is the original tone. Another really popular thing is you can sort of get with ring modulation, if you do your filtering correctly, you can get a lot of sort of guitar amp sims feel going on here. You won't nail it quite exactly. I find convolution is a better method for getting the guitar amp sim, or just running it through, but which I believe they use convolution to do that too, but I'm not 100% on that. Anyways, this is a great option to sort of get that grittier textures as people talk about. But that's the reasons why that grit sort of appears. So this is just turning it on and off. You see I have an envelope here. So you might be going, what is with this envelope 2 here? This envelope 2 is slowly adjusting the value of this over time. So if I were to play this for an extended period, it would slowly morph back into what it was originally. It would become it was as if this guy was moving around for me. And I did that for interest. It's literally the longest attack time I can have. So it happens over an extended period. So if I wanted it to morph over time, it'll do it for me instead of having to automate it. And I find that this is an intuitive thing to do. It makes sense musically, if I were to develop an idea with this motion happening over time, which is a good chunk of time, it's going to work very nicely. One thing that you may consider messing with here is the gate versus one shot. You may probably want one shot, because if you ever have a moment where the glide breaks, if you ever do this in your solo or whatever, you're going to start back at the beginning, and that could all of a sudden be an abrupt change and ruin your musical idea. So if you keep one shot, that will not happen. But if I were to play this, so you see how it changes, and I can develop an idea, and the tempo change enhances my idea. If you don't like it as a thing, you can just turn it off. I included that option in my particular patch. Your patch may vary, but that's why that's there. And as you can see, it's a very nifty way of creating variation. So the last one is you have reverb, but you also have effects that I suppose we could talk about here. You have chorus, flanger, mono. We took care of most of what I wanted to do with this when I was doing the voicing tab. So this is like sort of like ultra specific chorusing in a way. Something that you may be interested in is the dimensional expander or some sort of a Haas effect delay to create a widening of your sound. I would caution, be careful. This is the lead sound. lead sound, you probably want mostly mono, because if you play it over your phone, you want it to ring through clear as day and not sound phasey or weird. If you're going to add stuff, I recommend doing a mid-side setup where your mid is solid, and then you have a separate side signal that you can widen and do all sorts of things. So if you're listening in stereo, it sounds way bigger and way more full and incredibly awesome. But in your mono, it is left intact, so it'll still sound cool over a phone. I'd be cautious of adding delays of any kind that would cause phasing, because this is a very predictable harmonic spectrum. Phasing will occur very obviously in a sound like this. So you just want to be careful. And then if you're not in that habit, I haven't done this yet, but I'm going to save it, and I'll just name it Cool Saw Lead. Or maybe I'll name it, give it a little more meaning, RM Saw Lead, so I know what sort of methods I used. And then I didn't do this yet, but you may also consider going into attributes, naming it, do all that stuff. But you get the idea. So hopefully now you can go and make some cool sounds. We can continue to add macros. The trick when you're adding macros to add additional flexibility to your sound is you got to be careful. So like if I were to add more macros, I'd probably include oscillator 2 and 3, right? And add the sounds. That would require a little bit more shaping. I'm not the biggest fan of that right now. But what I could do is I would grab 4, and then I could drop 4 into the... I should have held down Shift, I believe allows me. Yeah, Shift allows me to continuously drop. And what I could do is I could add these in, and then I could have a separate macro for that and begin to go. But I always want to be able to revert back to the original inspiring sound. So when you're adding stuff to enhance your patch, I would stick with your original inspiring sound, the one that you made and was like, this is the sound I want. And then make sure that these don't get in the way. Some of these can be really cool because you could hook up 4 to turn this one off, this one on, that one off, and begin to generally create a sort of a preset morpher. And it can get a little complicated, but it's totally worth it because now you have a knob that moves really crazily. And my preset patch bass wobbles, which is on this computer, but in that one I have knobs called gloves knobs. That's what they do. They just give you crazy results back and allow you to sort of get something in an intuitive musical manner. So there's one other knob here that I didn't turn on, but I have a hard clipper on. I tried the parabolic shaper, but the thing about a parabolic shaper is it's non-linear, so if you give it softer signals and then louder signals, it can sound like super different. And that may be something that you want. Hard clipper is a freaking straight line. So if you're ramming it all the time, it's going to add some grit. If you ram it less hard, it'll add less grit. So that's what I was talking about as well in combination with the RM. If I hit this hard, see, it's like, oh man, that's some power there versus that, which is a much thinner texture, which could work in maybe a busier track versus this one could take up some more room and be that big driving thing. And then I could compress it and do some post-processing and make it everything that I dreamed it would be. Also, if I'm going to start this as a patch, I'd probably want that on. So I would like save this and go over to my RM Solid and save that. Hit yes, and then there you go, it's there. So that's that. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.
Getting round, getting up and going down, getting round, getting up and going down, getting round, getting up and going down. Now you will see and change your will.